All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us for our inaugural Future Thinkers series, which is really the launch of Lior's professional development program. Now, the reason we thought about creating a professional development program is really because we see a lot of children who unfortunately do get left out of the system and they fall between the cracks. And we want to think about how we can share our knowledge around inclusion to better improve the services that children are receiving and really open everyone's eyes to what inclusion does look like and sometimes what it doesn't look like. And that's why today's topic is really flipping the discussion around inclusion to focus on exclusion. I think it's a good starting point for us to launch this series because in my experience, I've seen that unless you've really experienced exclusion, it doesn't matter what sort of segment that's in, but unless you've really experienced it, you don't truly know what it's like to not belong. And I know that many of you might have had that experience, whether it's in a workplace, because of your gender, because of the colour of your skin. At some point, I imagine everybody's experienced that in some form or another. So I wanted to start this series off with a challenging discussion around what it looks like when we talk about exclusion and how that can improve practice. But before I do that, I want to do an acknowledgement of country. The land that I'm on is the Cammeraygal land, and I'm in the North Shore of Sydney. I want to acknowledge not only the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on, but also any First Nations people in the room today. And I also want to recognise that our Indigenous members of our community have been teaching our children for thousands of years, and we've got so much to learn from them in terms of how we treat our children, or jarjums, as Lisa's taught me, is the wonderful language that we use for children, and how much that can improve our practice in the early childhood space. Now over to our amazing panellists that have kindly donated their time to be with us today. First, I want to introduce Angela Priestley, who's the co-founder of Agenda Media and editor of Women's Agenda. Angela oversees and develops the business of Women's Agenda, which is a community and news brand for women with a focus on politics, business, leadership, climate, and other pressing issues. Angela previously launched investigative journalism publication The Power Index for crikey.com.au, which covered politics, business, media, law, and culture. Angela is constantly fighting the fight for the interests of women and holds a bachelor and master's in journalism. And the reason that we thought it was useful to bring Angela in is to talk a little bit about the perspective of women and how that impacts exclusion and inclusion. Lisa Walker is a Gullibar woman, and her people come from the East Coast Bundjalung, Yuin, Yagal, and Kabi Kabi nations. Did I pronounce that? Okay. No. You can correct me. Lisa is a cultural consultant with her nation and is the cultural design lead for Good Start Early Learning. Lisa is also working on a national advocacy project aimed at improving the lives of young jarjums through a global leader program with the World Forum Foundation in America. Now, Lisa and I got to know each other because we're actually part of the Apiary Fellowship, which is a set of a group that's working towards systems change in the early childhood sector. And I've been fortunate to work in a subcommittee in that group with Lisa, which is focused on children's voices. So I've really enjoyed getting to know Lisa and hearing more about the perspectives of First Nations people. Suzanne Cook is the Inclusion Hub Manager for New South Wales and ACT at KU Children's Services, where she has been for 17 years. Her role involves managing the government-funded programs to support children with additional needs. And Suzanne holds a Bachelor of Early Childhood Education at Macquarie Uni, which she graduated in with first-class honours, and a thesis on creating positive inclusion environments for children with disabilities in kindergarten. And Suzanne and I have had some dealings where we're trying to work out how children in home care might be supported through the type of program that Suzanne delivers to be in mainstream services, because the types of children that we support at Lior often can't go to those mainstream services. So it's really important that the supports around them really meet their needs. So first of all, I'm going to go to you, Angela, in terms of the first question, which is around what exposure have you had to exclusion when it comes to women, and what can we learn from those experiences?
Well, thank you, everybody. It's lovely to see everyone here on the call. It's nice that it's a small group, so we can probably have a little bit more interaction as well. It's great to see everyone's faces. I also want to acknowledge that I'm also on Camaragal land and acknowledge the elders past, present and future here, and as well as all First Nations people on the call. So thank you, Andrea, for putting on this session. If I may, it is International Women's Day week, and the key topic of discussion this week from UN Women is changing climates. And I think in the topic of exclusion, and also around women, around when we talk anything about diversity, inclusion, anywhere where people have been excluded from decision making, I think we need to consider climate change. I think it's hard to have a conversation about anything without thinking about climate change, but particularly on these topics, because climate change really does threaten to derail all progress made. I know that might seem like a little bit of an outside thing to pull in, but I've made a promise myself to always bring up climate change every single day from here on in every single session that I go into, because I think it is so essential and it seems to be missing from a lot of the conversation right now. So in terms of exposure to exclusion, first up, I mean, I talked to Andrew about this yesterday, so I tried to kind of reflect on my own experiences, and I thought back to part of my early career, and I have to say that I don't feel like I have been exposed to exclusion maybe over the past 15 years or so. I felt like definitely as a younger woman going into areas like in tech media, in radio journalism, places like that, I definitely did feel it then. I don't know what's necessarily changed. I think a lot could be that I do run my own business, so that kind of helps, I guess. But I really wanted to acknowledge, wanted to take this exposure to exclusion, I guess, to a different level, and the work that we do on women's agenda. One thing we really try to promote is advocating for women's representation across all areas, and part of that really includes advocating for women across so-called feminized industries, in terms of advocating for better pay, in terms of the respect that should be achieved for those in these industries, in terms of all of Australia understand the essential services that these industries actually do. And we learnt that a lot through COVID, but it's a shame that it would take a pandemic to get there. And it's a shame that even with the pandemic, we still haven't learnt that lesson hard enough. And I just think that this is, really the next big thing for Australia to consider, is that we just need to advocate for those across what have typically been defined as caring and education sectors, and therefore so often women's jobs, because women make up 90% plus of these sectors, to be better incorporated into the decision-making areas of all aspects of life. And I'm thinking in terms of business, community, politics, everywhere. I feel that those in care and education have expertise, knowledge, experiences that are far, far too underrepresented across boardrooms, entrepreneurship, across industry bodies, across politics, all aspects of social and community infrastructure. And we just need that, because we not only to ensure that the expertise around care is being leveraged beyond those direct care and education sectors, but also that the expertise is being leveraged to understand the risks and opportunities in these sectors, to understand burnout, to understand the talent exodus and the risk that is to Australia, to understand what those working in actually see day to day, and what they've seen works, and what they understand about collaborating and working with people through really difficult circumstances, which so many have in the past couple of years. So that's one thing I wanted to note, is that I feel that those working in these sectors, and particularly early childhood education, have just been totally excluded from so much of the national conversation and so much of the decision making that occurs. And we need to push for that. We need to change that. We need to have those with this experience in politics. I want to see them in government as well. And so often, one last one, we think about the future of work as being about technology and AI and cybersecurity and all these things, but the future of work is about care. This is where we're going to have the shortages in the future. This is everything. And those working in these sectors have just been excluded from decision-making for so long. We need to change that. I think we need to understand the risks right now of what happens if 3/4 of early childhood educators do actually leave, as we've seen the research that shows that there is that indication. What happens if we really fail to continue to not learn lessons from those in nursing professions that they've brought on from the pandemic? Like, why can't we bring all those lessons in and drive a better future for all of us? And that is the future of work. This is where we'll have the work shortages. This is where I feel like we should be encouraging our kids to go into, because that is where the jobs will be.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, I hypothesised that the challenge of 2022 is actually going to be workforce, where we've had the last 2 years of challenging COVID. And I think that there's a piece in there around being taken for granted. So we know during COVID, a lot of early childhood educators, it was just assumed that they would still turn up to work. They weren't considered in some of the protections that were outlaid for other people that were working. And also that assumption that there is going to be a woman or there's going to be a mother. And you talked a lot about this in some pieces over the pandemic when we were in lockdown, and how disproportionate it was that women were doing so much of that caring. So I think, yeah, absolutely, really amazing points. Now, Lisa, I imagine that you've probably got a lot of similar sentiments to share to Angela in terms of having a seat at the table and being involved in some of those conversations. How have you seen First Nations people being excluded from conversations?
Well, it's not very often that we're included. And when we are, you know, it can be for that ticker box tokenistic type stuff. You know, we need to be included in these conversations because we know what works for our mob, for our people, for our jarjums, and our communities. You know, and that's all we ask, is to be included in these conversations. You know, Australia is the only country in the world that does not have a treaty with its First Nations peoples. And we've been here for a long time. And we're quite a resilient, strong people who are up against everyday systems within this country that are set up for us to fail, whether that's in education, housing, health, or whatever. This is why I constantly, I usually have this picture behind me because, you know, as First Nations people, as a strong Bundjalung woman, I live in my two worlds every day. Whether that's in my professional or my personal, you know, parts of my life, where I am constantly having to prove myself and my worth and share my knowledge every single day. And it does not matter what role I have been in. I will always advocate for my people and try to share my voice, because when you talk about exclusion, how do you know unless you live that? You know, you can't speak on something that you have no life experience on or knowledge of, or something that you don't feel. I can't go out there and speak on behalf of someone who's non-Aboriginal because I'm not. So this is why it's so important, you know, don't just invite us to the table, but give us a share of the table, please. So, you know, and give us a turn at the driving seat too, so we can help drive the change. You know, in early childhood, we have a very important role as educators. I've been in the sector for 16 years. I am a mum myself. I have so many nephews and nieces, you know, I have a big mob. And, you know, the next generation is in our hands, and we should be teaching these little ones about accepting differences and sharing knowledge and culture, you know, for us all to grow and learn from each other. Because until that happens, you know, I don't see us moving forward in this country. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sentiment about being in the driver's seat, because something I talk about a lot in diversity in different circles is you actually need to make way, right? So you can't just constantly have all the seats at the table and have this advisory board over here and this panel over here and everyone feeds in. Make room at the table. And sometimes it means you have to give up space to let other people be in the driving seat. And, you know, what's the worst that can happen? You know, everybody learns from that experience and everybody shares in future knowledge. Another point that you raised, I want to take to you, Suzanne, is around this setting people up for failure and systems change. So a piece I recently wrote for Women's Agenda was around Charlize Mutton's sad death and the fact that the systems were failing her. So it wasn't actually anything that, you know, she could have done or she could have controlled, but the systems around her had let her down and are letting a lot of children down every day. What are you seeing in terms of children with disability and how the systems could be improved for them?
My area is the inclusion support program, and although we know that inclusion isn't just about disability, that it's about everyone and every person's strengths, you know, interests, cultures, values, and beliefs are to be acknowledged and respected. But probably today, my focus will be on children with a disability. So it's interesting because I'm in the program that's meant that, you know, that government has created to support these children. And what I would say, and maybe it'd be more appropriate to respond to it in fuller later on, but I actually do see wonderful things happening every day. And I think, yes, things could be changing. In fact, I was just talking to a colleague about that this morning. So at the moment, our program, which is to include, you know, cohorts of 7 different cohorts of children, but we are actually we're invited guests to the services. I can't go up to a service and say, I'm Suzanne, I'm your inclusion professional, how can I help? I can do that on the phone. I can say, hello, I'm Suzanne, how can I help? But they have to invite me in. So I think, I don't know, could it almost be, so the services that are eligible for our support are those that the families are eligible for childcare subsidy. So should part of that be that the services actually have to engage with us? You know, they have to connect with their inclusion professional and on a regular basis. We have to make a plan together, a strategic inclusion plan together. And so investment in that would actually help us to help more services. But I do want to encourage you that there are some amazing things happening out there.
That raises a good point around visibility because, as you're saying, if you're sort of approaching the services and letting them know that you're there, you know, is that really giving them visibility of necessarily being able to identify a child who might need additional supports, what sort of training there is? And I've been doing a fair bit of advocacy to government lately around training, the fact that educators could really benefit from complex needs training, you know, being able to identify when a child might need additional supports, being able to identify when there's some developmental challenges, because I think that, you know, we do see that a fair bit in the bachelor's degree or master's degree, but we don't see that a lot in the Cert 3 and diploma students. So how can we actually raise the bar for everybody? So just following on from that, Suzanne, if I can talk to you a little bit more about inclusion and some positive examples that you mentioned, can you give us some examples of how it's worked really well and where you've seen some success for children?
Effective models and what made it successful. So can I just give a shout out to somebody called Sandra Fisher, who was the director at the first service I worked in 25 years ago. And she showed us how to create an inclusive environment that no matter what the challenge, the day was filled with fun. And it was her mentoring that actually was the pull for me to go to study as a mature age student at Macquarie University. In my role at KU Children's Services, so I've been there for 17 years, and I have had the privilege of seeing inclusion working wonderfully well. With good news stories in abundance. I think that what makes it successful, it has to have strong support from the management and it has to be well resourced. But it's almost an attitude, and it's looking at all children and what they can do rather than what they can't do. And it's having high expectations for all our children. You know, it's when you see educators are engaging with children and not just supervising them. It's modelling positive interactions and teaching self-regulation and friendship skills. Sometimes it's about modifying the physical environment to manage the challenging behaviours. It's creating quiet spaces for any child to access when they need alone time. It's about fun and delighting in each other. And it's when a child you understand that each child has individual differences, and that's not ignored. In fact, differences are embraced and valued. Is that what makes us unique? Excuse me, I've just got to drink some water.
Those are really, I know those are amazing tidbits that people are going to take away as practical tips.
I think, so, but just, I think the most important thing is that one size doesn't fit all.
Yeah.
Inclusion and fairness are two different things. And everybody's learning style and skill set is different. And if we fail to meet that need, that that's just wrong. And so sometimes when we get called in, it's usually around challenging behaviour, but sometimes we get called in and they'll say, oh, we can't do a group time. This child's wriggling and squiggling, is kicking this child and that child. And we spend the whole time just saying, remember group rules, and, like moving children. So the child who's doing the kicking unintentionally and hitting is then isolated to sit at the side of the group. And I then sometimes would say, have you thought of sensory toys? And often an educator will say, but is that fair? Is that fair that that child gets the sensory toy when the others don't? And I just make the point that I need my glasses. Not everybody here is wearing glasses. I need my glasses to focus, attend, and learn. And these children may need some extra support, like a sensory resource to focus, attend, and learn. And it's not about everybody getting the same. It's about getting what they need. And to do that, we have to be creative in our thinking and design a program where all children can participate and learn. And that's where our program comes in. And we help to stir up that creativity, to really think about those children in that room with those educators. How can we support them to participate and learn?
That is really beautiful. I love that. I think that's such a good way of thinking about it. It's like that beautiful picture you see with the step, around equality and equity. It's like that step is there because it's going to get people to be on an equal footing. Angela, coming to you around this. This is a lovely concept that Suzanne's opened up around sort of what is it that women might need to have that seat at the table or to be able to step up into their position of equality.
I love everything that you said just then. And Andrea, I'm here Googling, trying to find that image, because that is exactly what I was thinking of, is where, you've got somebody standing on the step and there's the fence and you see that the step is there. So the shorter or the smaller person can see over the fence. It just makes absolute sense. And I think like everything that you shared, Suzanne, I was sort of putting in the context of a workplace as well. I was like, oh, okay. Yep. There's so much that we can learn from how I don't have the early childhood education experience, but how the tools that you're using there and how they would apply into the workplace and why they only get to be used for kids, and why we can't take that similar idea of, someone being given the sensory toy, or the idea of quiet spaces about fun and delighting each other. Like, I just thought there are so many nice things that we could take with us into other places as well. And what you said also about the differences being embraced, rather than kind of ignoring them or pretending they're not there or something, embracing those differences, understanding that they all have different differences, and that's a good thing, and it builds up that community. So in terms of bringing it into workplaces, I guess, and for women, I guess, maybe even outside of workplaces, is understanding the things that, you can't put it all about parents, but I will just start there. But as mothers, any mothers would know about the realities of the difficulties around flexible work, that even when it is called flexible, it so often isn't flexible at all. The realities around part-time work and how the impact that will have on your earning capacity and your ability to save for retirement later on. And too often where part-time work means that you're just working for where you're getting 4/5 of the salary or something, but you're still working full time. It's just in different hours. So acknowledging all those things about flexible work. And I think we've come a long way during the pandemic, certainly further than we ever could have without it, but acknowledging that we still have work to do in sectors where it's not knowledge-based, where you're not working from home, where you're not on a computer, where you do need to be in an environment like an early childhood centre, like you need to be in that environment. So it's not as simple as saying work from home or flexibility. So all these things matter, but in many ways, it's also looking to men as well. I mean, how can we encourage more men into these so-called feminized sectors? How can we get them to see the opportunities in there? How can we encourage men to take on more at home, particularly more men to take paid parental leave, more men to take unpaid parental leave? We have seen the data there that shows the massive difference that can be made when men have those weeks with a child at an early age, and how it impacts their relationship with that child later on, but also how it impacts their relationship with the work that gets done around a home and the unpaid work that goes into having children. So all those things, and ultimately ensuring that it comes back to the seat at the table. And I don't think it's not as simple as saying men and women, because it's about having diversity at the table.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. In fact, our team were just talking about this morning, because we've got such a dominant female workforce, and we've tried to get more men into the organisation, but it is challenging because, as you say, these are feminised workforces. And it's something also that we've talked about at the apiary, is around systems change to change the profile of the work that we do. So simple things like changing terminology, like childcare to early childhood education, educator instead of childcare worker. So, you know, raising respect and the command that these people doing really important work actually receive from the rest of the community. Mm-hmm. Lisa, coming to you on this same sort of point around, what do you think are some practical things that people can do to give that seat at the table and think about inclusion of points of view?
I guess not always expecting our people to come to you. You know, you fellas need to come out into our community and be amongst us for us to know that you're a safe place for our jargums to go to. Once we start seeing that, and you know, I guess for you to be, you know, strengthening your connections with us and ensuring strong relationships, you know, that goes back and forth, and that's the only way that you're going to get our people coming in. The other thing too is that you know, when we do come in, making sure that these spaces that you invite us into are culturally safe and welcoming. You know, because we need that space, so that we're, you know, we're learning to trust, and we're able to build those connections with you as well, but also to ensure, you know, that we're giving honest and open feedback as well. And that's not going to happen overnight. That takes time. There's a lot of back and forth. This is how our communities work. You know, so if you're committed to, you know, understanding and learning from our people, then that's how that will happen. It does take time and it does take energy, but for you to be committed to your two-way ongoing learning cultural journey, then that's part of that commitment. And I'm not sure whether it was Suzanne or Angela who mentioned before, it really does start with the leaders right at the top, and that filters down through your organisation or through your preschool, your early childhood setting, regardless of whether it's in early childhood and education or whatever sector, industry. You know, if you have deadly open-minded, passionate leaders at the top who are willing to bring their teams on that two-way cultural learning journey, then that's how, you know, those cultural barriers get broken down. We have to be having these confronting yarns to understand, you know, where we're coming from, you know, and learning from each other. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been fortunate to have that kind of experience myself when I'm on the Board of Relationships Australia, New South Wales, and we did a visit on country, and we got to really immerse ourselves in culture and have some of these difficult conversations. You know, what is it that we're not doing? What is it that we could do better? Where is it that we can take on our, like you said, our responsibility, so that we're not always waiting on our Indigenous brothers and sisters to come to us with the solutions, but how can we actually flip the switch? And we've just launched our reconciliation action plan, our second one, and it really, what I really liked about it is it had some really practical things that the board can do, the executive can do, that the team members can do, that is embedded into day-to-day practice. And it's not just, you know, tokenistic, it's not just, you know, doing an acknowledgement for the sake of it, it's really understanding why you're doing it, what are the types of practices that apply. And I think that's probably a good point for me to talk, Lisa, about what we're doing actually in the apiary, which is we're looking at running a pilot program on the use of children's voices in the early childhood space in terms of decision making and policy and practice. And so we're going to be using yarning circles where children will talk about their views and we give them agency about how, you know, anything that they come up with, any views that they share or questions that they might have, actually go up to decision making in the centres or in the home environment or wherever they're accessing early childhood education and care. So that's a little bit of a spruik for a project that Lisa and I are working on, and we're about to sort of take members of that for a pilot program. So it's something that, you know, I really loved, Lisa, how you gave us that understanding of children's voices from an Indigenous perspective.
The other thing to remember is, you know, you need to be yarning with your local people. You know, that is what is respectful to our people. You know, you need to be going and yarning with your local mob, connecting with them, reaching out, you know, and especially with, you know, early childhood as well. Once you take the time to connect with an elder, you know, that our elders are one-stop shop, living, walking, talking, breathing resources. They have so many connections in community. You know, they're the ones who will bring in the artists and the, you know, the dig players and the dancers, and, you know, as well as all that rich knowledge and songlines and stories and things like that. I mean, and it's not up to us to be giving you all this information. This is part of your ongoing cultural learning journey as well. And it's not just in your work time. This should be spilling over into your personal time too, you know, because then that way you're able to start having these conversations with your other work colleagues who may not be on that journey yet, you know, and this ensures that you're able to also start to embed these respectful, culturally appropriate practices, you know, throughout your programming within your centres. And
you've definitely done that for me. I've really enjoyed hearing, you know, your perspectives, and it's made me sort of open my mind and my thinking to inclusion in terms of First Nations people. So I have done, you know, other things outside our conversation. So I really love that influence you've had on me. So thank you. Now, Suzanne, just taking that a bit further. Now, we talk about belonging in early childhood and the fact that it's really important for children to know where they're from and the fact that there is a place for them in the community that they're in. You explained how amazing it was for that child to have access to the sensory tools to support them. But where else can you see benefits of belonging? Because it's not always just the person that is experiencing that. There's other inadvertent benefits to it. Have you seen that play out in the early childhood space?
As in the research evidence that says inclusion benefits everybody.
Yes. Yes, and I mean even in practice, I suppose what you've seen.
Yeah, so I suppose because I was thinking about exclusion, I probably haven't kind of thought about that so much in preparation for today. But no, the evidence says that when it's done well, and you know, and to be done well, it does need that support from management, and it needs to be well resourced. But when it's done well, you know, it has incredible benefits for so many people, and not just the individual child and their family. So it nurtures a sense of belonging and well-being for everybody, you know. So the other children, they're benefiting from that, and it increases understanding and empathy. You know, not everybody is able to run, or I remember the first little one I worked with cerebral palsy, and if he dropped something on the floor, it could take him 10 tries to scoop that up. But the joy on his face when he actually did scoop it up, you know. And so you have to kind of learn a little bit as well. When am I going to help, and when am I going to let the child, you know, just really have success themselves? So I think it also builds the children's skills. It builds social connections and peer relationships. Even with the children that don't have verbal language, I mean, we can support everybody, all the children, to either, you know, to learn keywords sign or to use visuals. One of the loveliest things that I've seen is that, you know, it's not just the educator that has, you know, like a lanyard or a, you know, a little belt clip with the visuals on it. The children have them. So there's one that maybe it's been triggered, the need for it might be triggered by a particular child. And so he's got, you know, a little one on his belt, and it's got his 5 favourite toys that he likes to play with. It's got water bottle to show he's thirsty. It's got bed to show he's tired. You know, those survival words. But so do all the other children. So he can actually, he's empowered. He can actually, you know, point. And yes, we would support, oh, you're tired, you're hungry. But it's lovely to, when you actually see his peers do it too. It's very beautiful. So it builds, I think it builds respect for diversity. And it facilitates acceptance. You know, when I grew up in Scotland as a young child, I was shopping with my mum, and all of a sudden she said, "Don't look, don't look." And of course, what does a 10-year-old do when you're told not to look? So I looked. And it was a child with quite an obvious physical disability in a wheelchair. Now, why my mum was saying, don't look, she was actually one of the most beautiful people in the world. But you see, children then were brought up in segregated settings. You know, they didn't go to the mainstream schools. They rarely were in the community. And she just didn't want me to say something that might upset the child or upset, you know, the family. And so I think we've come a long way since then. And that, you know, really, these are our children. They're our children. And, you know, we're going to play and learn together. So have I given you?
I love
have I given you enough benefits? Oh, okay. No, it benefits everybody.
Yeah, I think, yeah, and that's sort of what the picture I'm trying to paint here. Absolutely, we're talking about exclusion, because that's commonly what I suppose people of diverse backgrounds have experienced over time. But we do need to move to a sense of belonging. What does that really look like? And Angela, can you tell us a little bit about where you've seen that benefit decision making and benefiting the overall community from creating that sense of belonging? Oh, you're still on mute.
Probably should have learnt that lesson by now. But I guess, first of all, the sense of belonging needed to create the great decision making, because even if you have that diversity at the table, as Lisa mentioned, if you don't make it a safe space for people to speak, then what's the point? Like, you've got to make sure that sense of belonging is there and people actually feel included. So the question was about where it benefits decision making.
Yeah, decision making and the community in general.
Well, in the community, I mean, I can point to plenty of examples where, even if we look at women's input in leadership around, or decision making around climate change as well, like I brought at the top of the conversation, we see that in terms of in our own parliament, we see when we have women involved, how it can actually shift this conversation on climate. Like, we see that's so essential. I think also, when I started with the top of the conversation about if once we get more women involved who've got this direct experience with care and education, particularly early childhood education, I believe we'll be having much better conversations about the future of early childhood education as well, and how we better look after this workforce, and possibly even how we better fund things so we can make sure that more children get that sense of belonging from that early age, and make sure that those children have everything that they possibly need to thrive, and to particularly have empathy later on, which will ultimately benefit all of us. So I think there are so many aspects of our world that we could point to about where this bringing, more minds, more diverse minds together will have a dramatic difference. I can point to plenty of studies. We can look in the business world at where we look at it, chief executive women have data that shows a direct correlation between having women on the board or having a female CEO and the business success of that business. So that's we don't need to necessarily look at the business case anymore, but certainly I just feel we can look at the current situation in government. I'm not going to get political about it, but I mean, surely if nothing's changing and the same people over and over and are in those positions, then maybe we should try something else. Somebody put it to me last week about COP26. We've had 26 climate talks and yet we still haven't gotten very far. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that just 10 of the 170, 180 or so key decision makers in that process are female. What if we tried something different? So yeah, it will lead to better outcomes. We're at a point though, but we're on a lot of these things, we simply can't wait for the change to happen. We simply can't wait for that representation to occur, or wait to be left out of the conversations, to get past this exclusion, to be included, and then to feel actually like we belong. So I think that we need to jumpstart more on this. We can't expect it just to happen with time, because it hasn't happened with time.
Yeah, and I was actually in a meeting with the minister's advisor this morning talking about systems change for children, and one of the things I said to him was, look, there's a lot of bureaucracy that's getting in the way, and every time we kick it down the road a little bit further, children are missing out. So the longer we take to remedy some of these issues, like there are children who are growing up and missing out on these types of benefits. And the same thing, as you say, is with decision making. And I was in a session last year with an expert from Norway around early childhood education. And somebody asked the question, how come you got so far with this, universal access to education care? And he actually said it was because we had so many women in Parliament at the time. And this really stuck with me, because I thought you've got to have that seat at the table. You've got to have that voice at the table, because it's all well and good for us to do submissions and consultations and write papers and all that sort of stuff, but if you're not actually part of that group making that final decision, which is often being done in the corridors of Canberra, you don't know whether it's actually going to go through, because we can ask and ask and ask, but somebody's got to have your interest there, and they've got to be advocating for that interest on the day. Lisa, just coming back to this point about belonging, I know you started this conversation, but are there any things that you think or ways in which you think that this sense of belonging can be embedded into practice to prepare children for the future in terms of creating that sense of belonging, whatever they continue to do?
I guess self-reflection. We all have biases. We've got to be honest about that. Media does not portray our First Nations peoples as in a positive light a lot of the time. So I think, self-reflecting on the circles that, we grew up in, that we were brought into this world. And, we didn't have a choice back then as Jarjums, as little ones, but we certainly do now. Being open-minded and understanding and wanting to commit to that ongoing cultural learning journey, and having those yarns with other people. Our mob make up 3% of this country, not even 3%. We're not going to be able to change minds on our own. This is where we need our allies, and we need people like yourselves to be having these conversations as well. And our little ones are they're only little, but they also help break down those cultural barriers too. When we have knowledge holders or elders coming into our centres or coming into those spaces and engaging in those yarns, you know, us as adults are learning, but also our little ones are learning too. And they're the ones who are going back into community, and they're sharing their newfound knowledge with, grandparents. It's something as simple as, an animal on their shirt, oh, you've got a turtle on your shirt. Oh, no, that's a binging. That's what the Bundjalung people call it, Nanny. Oh, a binging, like it does not seem like much, but when you've got lots of little ones having these conversations as well, they're helping in that process too.
And my youngest did that to me recently. I had some First Nations books on the table, and she was like, I've got this flag in my preschool and I've got this, so it was really nice, because you're right, it's just starting that conversation, it's normalizing it, it's saying we're being inclusive, we're actually talking about everybody's culture, right?
Exactly. The other thing for our mob, when that culture is within our centres, that's healing for our little ones, that's healing for our people and for our communities, and we need healing to help us to move forward.
Yeah, I love that. I think we're probably all quite moved by that. It's really an important thing to point out. Now, just wrapping around, I want you guys to think about, what is it that everybody could take away? Because I've got a position on leadership, which is that we're actually all leaders. It doesn't matter what role you play, that there is going to be a forum in which you have a leadership opportunity, whether it's by your method of communication, modelling particular behaviour, or standing up for people in a scenario where their voices might not be heard. What's one tip that you could provide to leaders and anybody in the community who feels like there's not a place for leadership? What sort of behaviour could they model to advance the interests of people who are the minority and don't have their voices heard? Angela, I'll go to you first.
I guess one tip, there's many tips, I guess, that I'll look to, but I'll stick it to one thing. So it is to think about empathy, to learn empathy, or to think about your weaknesses around empathy, to think about how you're showing empathy every day. So where you are struggling with it, how you can improve on it, to maybe actively go out of your way to be more empathetic and take on those lessons. And maybe it is about applying some of the things, the empathy that we take to our children, whether that's our own children or children in our lives, or whether children in a work context, in a early childhood setting, to think about how we can take the application of empathy there into other conversations as well. I just think that so much of everything that we see, of every failure, comes down so often to a lack of empathy. So that would be it.
Often under represented, isn't it, in conversations around inclusion and considering other people's interests. Suzanne.
Yes, so I liked what you said about we're actually all leaders, and I think it's true. We need to take individual responsibility with this advocacy and have it happen in all parts of our life. It's not just our job. We need to share the importance of what we do, and that for me is telling all my friends, everyone I meet, about the research, such as, that there's many, but the high scope peri preschool study that's been going for years and years, fabulous longitudinal results. It shows that a quality early childhood education is a major proactive factor against risk, and it results in significant long-term benefits. So I'm telling everyone that, if you're educators, share your good news with the local newspaper and celebrate what's being achieved in your centre, because we're changing children's lives, especially those that are more vulnerable. We're resetting their trajectory for life to positive outcomes, to have a more happy, healthy and productive life. I think if I was talking to the big leaders, like the real leaders, I would ask them to remember that it's actually the educators in the care environments who have the day-to-day responsibility of implementing an inclusive programme. We already have the laws in place to give the people the right to inclusion. Now we need to recognise, support and value those that have the responsibility for ensuring that inclusion happens.
That's fantastic. Ties into where Angela started us off in the conversation. And Lisa.
Yeah, like I said, you know, probably two things. Be open-minded, do your research. That's also on you. That's not just on myself and our people. And use your power and privilege in whatever space you're in to be, you know, having those conversations around cultural, you know, newfound knowledge that you've learned or become aware of, injustices, you know, for First Nations peoples. Because at the end of the day, all us fellas want, and I'm speaking for myself, is to be living in the same country as everybody else, to be seen as an equal, to have the same opportunities, and you know, living a fair and equitable life.
That is a perfect way to summarize what we're trying to achieve through these discussions, I think. You know, as I said at the outset, this is the start of our series on Future Thinkers, which is really where we want to challenge thinking, and we want people to be set up for the future. And like Lisa said, these are children who we want to go out and share knowledge and know how to learn about others, and those who are maybe not as fortunate as them, or might not be looking the same as them, or not have the same skin color, or not have the same abilities, as Suzanne said. So thank you so much. I've really enjoyed hearing all of your perspectives, and I hope the rest of you have as well. We've got some amazing speakers coming up. The next one we have is with Graham Innes, who was the former Disability Discrimination Commissioner, and we're going to talk a bit more about some of the topics that Suzanne mentioned, but we're going to talk about it from a systems perspective. How can we change systems to make it more inclusive for children, but also through collaboration with other parties, so their families, their therapists, and really create that type of holistic solution for systems change. So thank you again for joining us, and really appreciate your time. Thank you, Angela, Lisa, and Suzanne. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.